The cursed village begins in 1958. There was a small forgotten village in America called Willow Creek, a place surrounded by endless forest. No highways, no noise, only silence. But the silence was not peaceful. It felt watched, because every night at exactly 12 a.m., a strange yellow light appeared deep inside the forest. A lantern. It moved slowly between the trees, like someone was carrying it. But no one ever saw the person, and no one who followed it ever came back the same. Some never came back at all. The grandpa and the warning. In Willow Creek lived a boy named Daniel. He lived with his grandfather. His grandfather was a quiet man, always serious, always distant. One evening, Daniel asked, "Why does everyone fear the forest?" The old man stopped. He looked at Daniel for a long time. Then he said, "I saw the lantern once, when I was young." Daniel froze. His grandfather continued, "I followed it, thinking it was just light." "But the forest is not normal, Daniel. It remembers those who enter. The forest that calls." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The house was silent. The wind outside was moving strangely. Around midnight, Daniel saw something through his window, a faint yellow glow, deep inside the forest. It was not bright. It was soft, almost alive, and it felt like it was calling him, not by sound, but by thought, as if it knew his name. "Daniel." He stepped back, but his eyes stayed on the light. The decision. Minutes passed. The house was silent. His grandfather was asleep. But Daniel felt something pulling him, a strange force, like curiosity mixed with fear. Slowly, he got out of bed. He walked toward the door. His hand touched the handle. He stopped for a moment. Then he whispered, "I just want to see," and he opened the door. The night outside, the village was completely silent. No dogs barking, no lights in windows, only fog. Cold air touched his face. The forest stood far away, dark and endless, and inside it, the yellow light moved again, deeper this time, waiting. The first step toward the forest, Daniel began walking. Each step sounded louder than it should. The ground felt colder. The wind stopped suddenly. Even nature felt like it was holding its breath. And then he reached the edge of the forest. The trees were too tall, too close, too quiet, and the lantern was waiting inside. End of part 1. The light moved again, slowly, deeper into the forest. Daniel took a breath and stepped inside.
Daniel stood at the edge of the forest. The trees were not just tall, they felt alive. The wind moved differently here. Slow, unnatural, like it was breathing. He took his first step inside, and immediately, everything changed. The village noise disappeared completely. Even the sound of insects stopped. Only silence remained. A deep, heavy silence, like the forest was listening. The fog begins to change as Daniel walked deeper. Fog slowly started forming around him. But it wasn't normal fog. It moved like waves. Sometimes it formed shapes that looked almost like people. Daniel stopped walking. He looked around. Nothing was there, but he felt it clearly. Something was watching him. The strange footprints. Daniel looked down. On the forest ground, there were footprints, but they were not his. They were bigger, too deep, too fresh, as if someone had just walked here. Seconds before him, he followed them slowly. Each step made his heart beat louder. The broken bridge appears after walking for a long time. Daniel reached something unexpected, a wooden bridge, old, broken, hanging over a black river. The water below did not move normally. It was too still, too dark, like a mirror with no reflection. and on the other side of the bridge, a faint yellow light appeared. The lantern, waiting. The light calls again. The lantern did not flicker. It did not move randomly. It waited, as if it knew Daniel had arrived. Then slowly, it moved forward again, deeper into the forest. Daniel whispered, "Why? Are you showing me this?" But there was no answer, only silence. The whisper in the wind. As Daniel stepped onto the bridge, the wood creaked loudly. Each step felt unstable. The river below started moving slightly, not naturally, like something underneath was waking up. Then, a whisper came, soft, clear, close. Daniel. He froze. He turned quickly. Nothing. Only fog behind him. But now he knew he was not alone. The forest feels alive. Halfway across the bridge, the wind suddenly stopped. Everything became still. Even the lantern stopped moving. It stood far away, glowing softly. As if it was waiting for him to finish crossing, the forest felt like it was watching him cross. Not trees, not wind. Something deeper. Something ancient. The first sign of fear. Daniel reached the other side. His breathing was heavy now. His hands were shaking. And then he noticed something terrifying. The lantern was closer than before, but he never saw it move toward him. It was like the forest itself was shifting, bringing it closer. He stepped back slightly, but the ground behind him was gone. Only forest, only darkness. No way back the same path anymore. The path changes suddenly. The forest path changed direction. Trees shifted slightly, like the forest was correcting his direction, guiding him, forcing him. Daniel realized something terrifying. He was no longer following the lantern. The lantern was guiding him. Daniel stood silently as the lantern drifted deeper into the forest. For a few moments, he wondered if he should turn back. His grandfather's warning echoed inside his mind. Never follow the lantern. But curiosity was stronger than fear. Taking a slow breath, Daniel continued walking. The forest became darker with every step. The moonlight could no longer reach the ground. The thick branches above formed a ceiling of black leaves, blocking almost every ray of light. Only the mysterious lantern continued to glow ahead. Its soft yellow light reflected on the wet ground, creating strange patterns between the trees. Daniel noticed something unusual. The forest no longer felt cold. Instead, it felt strangely warm, as if someone had been walking here only moments before him. He stopped, slowly turning his head from left to right. Nothing. No birds. No insects. No wind. Only silence. A silence so deep that he could hear his own heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. Suddenly, a dry branch snapped somewhere behind him. Daniel quickly turned around. Nothing. Only darkness. He waited for several seconds. No movement, no sound. He slowly continued walking. After several more minutes, the lantern suddenly disappeared. Daniel froze. The light had simply vanished. The forest became completely black. For the first time that night, fear completely surrounded him. He whispered softly, "Where did it go?" Just then, a faint light appeared again. But this time, not in front of him, to his right, hidden behind a wall of trees. Daniel carefully pushed the branches aside, and there, he saw something unbelievable. An old wooden cabin. Oh, it looked abandoned for decades. Its roof had partially collapsed. The windows were broken. The wooden walls were covered with moss. A rusty lantern hook still hung beside the front door. The yellow light slowly disappeared inside the cabin. Daniel swallowed nervously. Every instinct told him to leave. But another feeling, a stronger feeling, told him to open the door. He slowly stepped onto the old wooden porch. The wood creaked loudly beneath his feet. 1, 2, 3. Every step echoed through the silent forest. Daniel reached for the rusty door handle. His hand trembled. The metal was freezing cold. He slowly pushed the door. Creak. The old door opened with a long, painful sound. A cloud of dust floated into the air. The smell inside was ancient. Old wood, dust, and something else. Something impossible to describe. Daniel stepped inside. The room was almost empty. An old rocking chair slowly moved by itself. Back and forth. Back and forth. Although there was no wind. A broken fireplace stood against the wall. An old bookshelf had collapsed onto the floor. Spiderwebs covered nearly everything. Yet, one small wooden table looked strangely clean, as if someone had recently touched it. On the table, there was a leather-bound diary. Beside it, a small black and white photograph. Daniel slowly picked up the photograph. It showed a smiling little girl, around 10 years old, standing beside the very same cabin, holding the very same lantern. Written beneath the picture were 2 words, Emily Carter. Daniel's heart began beating faster. He looked toward the diary. Slowly, he reached out and opened the first page.
Daniel slowly opened the first page of the old diary. The paper was yellow with age. The corners were torn. The ink had faded after so many years. Yet the handwriting remained clear enough to read. At the top of the page was a date, October 14, 1923. Daniel took a deep breath and began reading. My name is Emily Carter. If anyone finds this diary, it means I never made it home. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. He turned to the next page. People in Willow Creek think the forest is only full of wild animals. They are wrong. There is something much older living here. Something that does not belong to this world. A cold breeze suddenly swept through the cabin. The pages of the diary began turning by themselves. Daniel quickly held the book with both hands. The room became completely silent. Not even the old rocking chair moved anymore. He looked around. Nothing. But the feeling of being watched became stronger. He continued reading. The lantern appears only for those it chooses. At first it looks beautiful, warm, safe. It makes you believe someone is waiting for you. But the deeper you follow it, the harder it becomes to leave. Daniel swallowed nervously. He remembered the strange footprints, the bridge, the whisper that had called his name. Everything Emily had written was happening to him. He turned another page. There was a rough sketch of the forest. Old trees, a narrow path, the broken bridge, the abandoned cabin, and farther north, a place marked with a single black circle. Under it, Emily had written only 2 words. Don't enter. Daniel stared at the drawing. The black circle looked as though the ink had been pressed into the paper with great force, almost like Emily had been terrified while drawing it. Then he noticed something folded between 2 pages. It was an old map, much older than the diary itself. The edges had almost turned black with age. Daniel carefully unfolded it. The map showed Willow Creek nearly 100 years earlier. Most of the village looked the same, but something was different. Deep inside the forest, there was a church that no longer existed. Someone had drawn a red line from the cabin to the church. At the end of the line, a symbol, a lantern. Daniel whispered, a church hidden inside the forest. He looked back at the diary. Emily had written one final note beside the map. If you are reading this, the lantern has already chosen you. Do not trust the light. Trust your heart. Before Daniel could turn another page, a loud noise echoed upstairs. Thump. He froze. The cabin had looked abandoned. No one should have been there. Again. Thump. This time it sounded heavier, like slow footsteps across old wooden boards. Daniel looked toward the staircase. It disappeared into darkness. He held the diary tightly. His breathing became faster. Should he run, or should he find out who or what was upstairs? The silence returned. For almost 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then, A child's voice whispered softly from above. "Daniel." He closed his eyes. It was the same voice he had heard near the bridge. Gentle, calm, but deeply unsettling. Gathering every bit of courage he had, Daniel picked up an old oil lamp from the table. Its flame flickered weakly. He raised it toward the staircase. One slow step, then another. Every wooden stair creaked beneath his feet. The air grew colder with each step upward. The smell of dust faded. Instead, there was the faint scent of old flowers, like roses left in an empty room for decades. At the top of the stairs, a narrow hallway stretched into darkness. 3 old doors stood silently. The first door was slightly open. The second was locked with a rusty chain. The third door was slowly moving by itself, back and forth, without a sound. Daniel tightened his grip on the lamp. His heart pounded in his chest. He slowly walked toward the moving door. Just as he reached out to touch the handle, the whisper came again, this time right beside his ear. "Don't open it!" Daniel spun around. No one was there, only the endless darkness of the hallway. Yet he knew. He was no longer alone inside the cabin. Daniel stood frozen in the dark hallway. The whisper still echoed inside his ears. "Don't open it!" His breathing became slow and heavy. The old oil lamp in his hand flickered violently, even though there was no wind. He looked at the 3 doors once again. The first door remained slightly open. The second door was still locked by a thick, rusted chain. The third door continued moving slowly, back and forth, back and forth. It was almost as if someone had just stepped inside and forgotten to close it. Daniel knew he should leave. Every instinct inside him screamed to run back to the village. But another feeling, a stronger feeling, told him that the answers he was searching for were hidden behind that door. He slowly reached out. His fingers touched the old wooden handle. It felt colder than ice. For a brief second, everything became completely silent. Then, he pushed the door open. Creak! The room was almost completely dark. Only the weak light from his oil lamp illuminated the space. It was a child's bedroom. An old wooden bed stood near the window. A faded blue blanket still covered the mattress. On a small shelf rested several old toys. A wooden horse, a cloth doll, a tiny music box covered with dust. Daniel slowly walked inside. The room looked untouched, as if time had stopped here. On the wall hung dozens of children's drawings. Most showed the same forest, the same lantern, and always a little girl standing beneath its light. Daniel stepped closer. One drawing looked different. It showed the little girl reaching toward the lantern, but behind her, a tall black figure watched from between the trees. Its face had been scratched out violently. Daniel felt a chill run through his body. He turned toward the bed. Something lay beneath it. Kneeling down, he carefully reached underneath. His fingers touched a small metal box. He pulled it out. The lock had already broken with age. Inside were several letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The first letter was addressed to Emily Carter. Daniel carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was different from the diary. It was written by Emily's mother. "Emily, if you ever read this, your father and I never stopped searching for you. Every night we left a lantern outside the house, hoping you would find your way home." Daniel slowly closed his eyes. His heart became heavy. Emily had not simply disappeared. Her family had waited for her, night after night, year after year, without ever knowing what truly happened. As he reached for the second letter, a soft melody suddenly filled the room. Daniel looked up immediately. The old music box had begun playing by itself. Its tiny melody echoed gently through the empty cabin. Slow, beautiful, and incredibly sad. The oil lamp flickered again. The room grew colder. Daniel turned toward the window. Outside, the forest had changed. The fog had become thicker, and standing among the trees, he saw her, a young girl wearing a pale blue dress, long dark hair, bare feet. She held the glowing yellow lantern in her right hand. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't crying. She was simply watching him. Daniel whispered softly, "Emily?" The little girl slowly raised her left hand, not to wave, but to point, toward the deeper forest. Then, without making a single sound, she turned around and disappeared into the fog. The lantern light faded with her. Daniel stood motionless. He now understood something important. The lantern was not leading him by accident. Emily wanted him to follow. But why? What was waiting deeper inside the forest? Holding the diary close to his chest, Daniel walked back into the hallway. The cabin no longer felt empty. It felt as though someone had finally shared a secret that had remained hidden for decades. He stepped outside. The cold night air greeted him once again. Far beyond the trees, the yellow lantern appeared, brighter than ever before. This time, it did not move. It simply waited, as if the next step would change Daniel's life forever.
Daniel stood outside the old cabin, holding Emily's diary tightly against his chest. The cold wind had returned. The yellow lantern glowed between the trees, brighter than it had ever been before. But this time, it wasn't moving. It simply waited. Daniel looked back toward the cabin one last time. The old porch was empty. The upstairs window was dark. The music box had fallen silent. It was as if the cabin had never been alive at all. Taking a deep breath, Daniel stepped forward. Every step carried him farther away from the only place that still felt familiar. The forest grew thicker. The trees stood closer together. Their twisted branches blocked almost every trace of moonlight. The only light left was the lantern. After several minutes of walking, Daniel noticed something strange. The ground beneath his feet had changed. The soft dirt became old stone. Large, cracked stone slabs stretched ahead like an ancient road buried beneath the forest. He knelt down and brushed away the leaves. There were carved symbols on the stones, crosses, circles, strange markings he had never seen before. He remembered the map inside Emily's diary, the old church, the hidden path. He realized he was standing on it, the forgotten road leading to the church. A sudden gust of wind swept through the trees. The lantern floated farther ahead. Daniel followed without speaking. As the forest slowly opened, a massive stone building appeared through the fog, an abandoned church. Its bell tower had collapsed long ago. The stained glass windows were broken, vines covered the walls, yet despite its age, the large wooden front door stood slightly open, as though someone had entered only moments ago. Daniel slowly climbed the worn stone steps. The lantern drifted inside. For several seconds, he simply stared at the entrance. Every instinct warned him to turn back. But Emily's diary had led him here. He pushed the heavy wooden door open. A deep echo rolled through the empty church. Inside, long wooden pews stood covered in dust. Broken candles lay scattered across the floor. The air smelled of damp stone and old memories. At the far end of the church stood a large altar, and above it, a cracked stained glass window. It showed a figure holding a glowing lantern. Daniel slowly approached. The closer he came, the colder the church became. Then, he heard footsteps, not behind him, not outside, from beneath the floor, slow, heavy. One step, then another. Daniel looked down. The old wooden floor trembled slightly, dust fell from the ceiling. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a low voice echoed through the church. "The light remembers." Daniel spun around. No one was there. Again the voice came. "The light never forgets." His hands tightened around Emily's diary. Suddenly, the lantern floated toward the altar. It stopped in front of a large stone cross. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then the floor beneath the altar began to shake. A loud grinding sound echoed through the church. The stone altar slowly moved aside. Hidden beneath it, a narrow staircase descended into complete darkness. Cold air rushed upward. It carried the faint scent of burning oil and old smoke. Daniel raised his lamp. He looked into the darkness below. He could see nothing, only endless blackness. Then, far below, another yellow light appeared. It was not the lantern, it was something much larger, something waiting. Daniel understood. If the real mystery had never been inside the forest, it had always been beneath it. He took one slow breath, stepped onto the first stone stair, and began descending into the darkness. Daniel slowly descended the ancient stone staircase. Each step echoed through the darkness. The air became colder with every step he took. Behind him, the entrance to the church slowly disappeared from sight. The only light that remained came from the small oil lamp in his left hand, and the strange yellow glow rising from somewhere deep below. He had no idea how far he had walked. 5 minutes? Maybe 10. Time itself seemed to disappear beneath the earth. The staircase finally ended. Daniel stepped onto a cold stone floor. The chamber before him was enormous. It looked nothing like a cave. Instead, it looked like the remains of an ancient underground cathedral. Massive stone pillars stretched toward a ceiling hidden in darkness. Old candles stood in iron holders along the walls. None of them were burning. Yet the room was not completely dark. A soft golden light floated through the air like tiny stars. Daniel looked closer. His heart nearly stopped. They were not lights. They were glowing memories. Tiny fragments of people, laughing, crying, calling for help. Every glowing particle carried the echo of someone's life. Daniel reached out carefully. The moment one of the lights touched his hand, a vision filled his mind. He saw a young hunter running through the forest. He saw the yellow lantern. He saw fear. Then, everything disappeared. Daniel staggered backward. What was that? A calm voice answered from the darkness. Those are the memories of the ones who followed the light. Daniel quickly turned. An old man wearing a long black coat stood beneath one of the stone arches. His hair was completely white. His face was lined with age. But his eyes glowed with the same golden light as the lantern. You, Daniel whispered. The Guardian. The old man nodded slowly. I have been waiting for you. Daniel tightened his grip on Emily's diary. You knew I was coming? The Guardian looked toward the floating lights. No one reaches this place by accident. The lantern never chooses the wrong person. Daniel stepped closer. Then tell me the truth. What is this place? The Guardian remained silent for several seconds. Then he slowly raised his hand. The floating lights gathered together. One by one, they formed moving pictures in the air. Daniel watched in amazement. The images showed Willow Creek nearly 100 years earlier. The village was larger. Children played outside. Families laughed together. Life seemed peaceful. Then, one winter night, the lantern appeared, just as it had appeared for Daniel. A young boy followed it into the forest. Then another. Then another. Days passed. None of them returned. Fear spread through the village. People searched the woods, but every search ended the same way, empty-handed. The floating memories changed again. Now Daniel saw the church. It was new, bright, filled with people praying. In the center stood a priest holding an old brass lantern. The Guardian spoke quietly. That lantern was never meant to trap anyone. It was created to protect the village. Daniel frowned. What happened? The Guardian lowered his head. Greed. There are always people who believe power belongs only to them. He pointed toward another vision. A stranger entered the church. His face remained hidden beneath a dark hood. He demanded the lantern. The priest refused. That night, the stranger performed an ancient ritual beneath the church. The light changed. The lantern became cursed. It no longer protected people. It lured them. It fed upon fear, loneliness, and regret. Daniel listened without speaking. Everything his grandfather had feared, everything Emily had written, it had all begun here. The Guardian slowly walked toward a massive stone door at the far end of the chamber. Ancient symbols covered its surface. In the center, the same lantern symbol was carved into the stone. This, the Guardian said quietly, is where the curse sleeps. Daniel felt the ground vibrate beneath his feet. A deep sound echoed behind the stone door. Not a voice, not an animal, something older. Something older. Something impossibly ancient. The floating lights suddenly dimmed. The chamber became silent. Then, Emily's gentle voice echoed once more. Daniel. This time, it did not sound frightened. It sounded hopeful. The Guardian looked directly into Daniel's eyes. You have already come farther than anyone before you. But once this door opens, there will be no turning back. Daniel looked at the diary in his hands. He remembered his grandfather, Emily, the empty village, the lantern. He slowly nodded. I'm ready. The Guardian placed his hand on the ancient stone. The lantern symbol began to glow. The entire chamber trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. A loud, grinding sound echoed through the underground cathedral. Slowly, the massive stone door began to open. Behind it, only darkness waited. And somewhere inside that darkness, two glowing golden eyes opened. The massive stone door slowly opened. A freezing wind rushed through the underground chamber. Daniel stepped forward with the Guardian, holding Emily's diary tightly. Beyond the door was a huge stone hall filled with thousands of faded names on the walls. Every name belonged to someone who had disappeared from Willow Creek over 100 years. At the center stood a stone pedestal. On it rested the original lantern. Its golden light filled the room, warm, beautiful, almost alive. But Daniel now understood the truth. It was not just a lantern, it was a prison. Every soul who followed its light was trapped inside it. As he moved closer, the lights surrounded him. Memories flooded his mind. He saw Emily, lost in 1923. He saw fear searching villagers and her slow disappearance beneath the old church. Then he saw something shocking, his own grandfather, who had once stood in this same chamber. The guardian said, "The lantern feeds on fear, but it can only be destroyed by compassion." Daniel stepped forward. Shadows rose, whispering and screaming, trying to stop him, but he kept walking. Emily appeared beside the lantern. She smiled softly and said, "You came back." "I promised I would," Daniel replied. He placed her diary beside the lantern. Pages turned by themselves and new words appeared. The light was never meant to imprison. It was meant to guide the lost back home. Suddenly, the chamber shook. Golden light exploded everywhere. The carved names began to vanish. Thousands of trapped souls rose as glowing lights into the air. Emily cried, but for the first time she was not afraid. The guardian slowly turned into light and disappeared, saying, "Some legends must end so new generations can live without fear." The lantern faded, smaller and smaller, until it was gone. Silence. The curse of Willow Creek had ended. Weeks later, the forest changed. The fog disappeared, birds returned, children played again. Daniel never told the full story. His grandfather only looked at him and understood everything. Years later, Daniel, now old, would say, "Not every light is meant to be followed, but sometimes one brave heart can change an ending." And Willow Creek became peaceful again. Emily was finally home. The end. The end.